Hello. Happy second Sunday of Easter. And I'm glad that for those of you that have been coming to Sunday school, so to speak, and keeping up, it's been, pretty wild not seeing you guys. Um, I wish there was some way we could do a Zoom Sunday school class and have everybody be together, but that's, quite a thing to administrate. So we'll just leave it this way for now. But I hope those of you that are watching it are at least feeling like you're getting a little bit of Sunday school and keeping up through the groups that the church has set up. I got a shout out to Lisa for calling and sending emails, and of course for Pastor Kim for being on top of that and wanting to keep the congregation together, and for all of you for reaching out with each other, which has really always been one of your strengths in Sunday school, in keeping those connections going. Such a cool thing, and it's really been great being able to continue to be a part of that with y'all. The second Sunday of Easter, of course, it's taken us a week to get here, but the scripture reading from John 20 is really about that night. But in terms of the emotional life of the disciples, you'll see that it's quite a ride for them. And it really, this one feels kind of appropriate to our situation. John chapter 20 starts with verse 19. Now the whole reading goes for quite a while, but I'm only going to read a few verses here. Starts, like I said, verse 19. Then the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, so it's Sunday night, the stone rolled away in the morning, and the women saw Jesus and they had all this interaction. And now here we are at nighttime, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut where the disciples were assembled for fear of the Jewish leaders. Jesus came and stood in their midst and said unto them, Peace be unto you. And when he had so said, he showed them his hands and his side, and then the disciples were glad when they saw the Lord. And Jesus said to them again, Peace be unto you, as my Father has sent me, even so I send you. And that struck me, that they were isolated. They were shut up. They were still in fear. They weren't shut up just to have a little retreat time together. There are times when you get put yourself aside as a way of being together so you can move forward. And there's a way of shutting yourself up in fear that keeps you from being with the other people. And that's what they're with each other, but they're sort of hunkering down, and they're not doing it in joy, even though some of them know here that Jesus has arisen. Jesus is back, and some of them know it intellectually, but it hasn't quite hit yet. So the fear is still real. The fear that Jesus is back, that's all well and good, but how's that going to save me if the Romans come knocking at the door? I'm gonna be in trouble. I don't like that. So they're having to deal with that, which it's a real thing. The Jewish leaders were still unhappy with Jesus and his followers, and the threat is a real threat. So it's not a fake thing that they're dealing with. And Jesus walks in, just pops in like he does after the resurrection, blink, and there he is. And first thing he says is, peace be with you. Because just like every other interaction Jesus had with the disciples and their life with him, he knew what they needed. He knew where they were, so to speak. And here is where they needed peace. And of course, when Jesus says, "Peace be with you," in a sense, it's different than when we say, "Peace be with you," when we're passing the peace, whenever we do that at church. We can mean "Peace be with you." We can intend to say it to one another, but we don't really have, you and I don't really have the wherewithal in general to communicate the level of peace that Jesus did right here. Now, there have been times, I think, in my life when I've approximated that, obviously not to the same level that Jesus did, but there was this one time when we were traveling in in our 56 Ford, and it was back when the kids were little, so the car was newer then, and we were still several miles from home, had a ways to go yet, and yes, that means I traveled around in the 56 Ford and drove it like a regular car, because that's the car we had. And so we were driving along, and it started bucking, and it was an ignition deal, and I pulled over and was able to sort it out, and we got back on the road. But Beth, who was, I think, I don't know, 6 or 7 at the time, was worried, because most of the cars that we had had up to then had been reasonably reliable. And now the Ford was acting like it didn't want to go, and I'd had to stop and get out and fuss with it, and I gave back in, and she said, "Daddy, are we gonna make it home?" And I turned and said, "Beth, I'll always make sure that you get home. I will always make sure that you get home. We'll always get home." And she thought about that for a second, and I could see her, I guess, her mind working, and she thought that sounded okay. She believed her dad when he said, I've got this, and I'm going to make sure you get home. Whatever happens, the car might break, but we'll still get home. And I meant it. And she believed me, and she had peace right then. She had peace because she recognized in her father at that point somebody who had the ability to pull off what I said I would. It wasn't an empty promise. She recognized that I would do what needed to be done to get her home at that moment. And she was happy to believe me that was going to be the case. And sure enough, we did. We got home. And I worked a little more on the car to make sure it wouldn't do that particular problem again, which it didn't. But it did other problems. Many, many other problems, because, it was an old car. But that problem I solved, and we got home that day. And we made it home every other time, too. Sometimes after a while, but it worked at that point. And it struck me that when Jesus said, "Peace be with you," at that moment to the disciples, it made a difference in their lives, because they realized Jesus was one that could bring them peace. He was one that could literally make happen what he said. That their concern, their worry for what was going to happen to them had knotted them up so much that even though in their head they knew Jesus was alive, in their hearts they couldn't act it out. And it wasn't until Jesus came and brought them that peace, and they felt it here, that they could begin to act it out in their lives and open the door and go outside and begin to be the disciples of Jesus that he had taught them to be. The fear that had gripped them was so tight that they couldn't be the people that Jesus had been teaching them to be until they had his peace in their lives. And once they did, it made all the difference in the world. It made all the difference. which is the same for us. When we say peace be unto you, as as a passing of the peace, we don't say it in an empty way. I think we're saying it in a way to say that we commend Jesus' peace to each other, recognizing that that's where the peace comes from. That's where the ability to see beyond the immediate problem comes from, is when we recognize Jesus in our own lives, and that in that sense that we can pass that along to one another. So when we're shut up now with our, I'm outside here in my backyard, maybe you can hear my neighbor's stereo going, and the birds and the wind and the trees and the bamboo behind me. But I don't go out much. And it's not so much out of fear, although I certainly don't want to get coronavirus, but I recognize that there's still an element of the foreignness of being shut up in there. The difference is that you and I can have the peace of Christ in our hearts, knowing that regardless of what happens, if I get the coronavirus and the worst thing happens, that I'm safe in Jesus, and that's not a worry for me. That'd be sad, but I'm not worried for my soul. I'm not worried for that. I'm concerned for, the regular life of things. I'm concerned for the way the economy stopped. I'm concerned in many different ways. But for here, that's not a worry, because that part of peace is within me. Jesus really did do that for me, just like he did for the disciples, just like he does for each one of his believers, that puts their hearts in his care. It's a cool thing that Jesus really is there with us. So when he said, "Peace be unto you," he was able to give them that peace in a way that they didn't have in any other way, in a way they probably didn't even understand they had access to until they had it. And then their lives changed forever after that. And the world changed. Now, we're still a ways away from Pentecost and the beginning of the church, but right here, peace be unto you, and them receiving that peace in a way that they hadn't before, was where it really all busted open, was where they were able to be the people that Jesus had been teaching them to be that whole time. And for you and I, as we have this enforced time by ourselves, we also can continue to be that force for the gospel that Jesus wants us to be. Because as we live out the peace within us, Jesus told them, now go out and show the world what that peace means. And that's still the job, isn't it? That's still the job, to go out and to live that peace in the world, to be that peace in the world, so that when we say, "Peace be unto you," we do it from here. And we can actually help people to understand what it means, to know that they have a connection with God forever through Jesus, that Jesus can really touch them in that way. Peace be unto you, at a far deeper level. So we say peace be unto you when we're passing the peace as a way to remind each other what it means to have Jesus in our lives. We live peace be unto you when we are able to show everyone in the world around us that sense of assuredness that we have, that Jesus in our lives makes a difference for who we are. And we can live that daily. We can communicate that in a very real way. Now, it won't be, popping in through closed doors. We don't need to bother with that. We have friends, we have people that we meet, and more, of course, when we're able to go out and relate to people. But even now, the few people that we're able to interact with, we can be ones who are that force for peace. Peace be unto you. Jesus meant it. So can we. So can we. Thank you all for your prayers and for your, as I said, continuing to be the Sunday school class, to continuing to be the church, even when we can't go to the, even when we can't go to the sanctuary. So that's what it was all about, really, when we sang, when we were kids. I am the church, you are the church, we are the church together. That it's not about the building. Church is not a building. The church is not a steeple. Church is not a resting place. The church is the people, you and me, and we're continuing to do it. Thank you so much for that continued connection with each other and being the church, touching the lives of each other, and of course through that the world. It's very cool. Thank you all. Love you guys, and happy Sunday.